Emerging markets got off to quite a rough start this year, but many developing countries actually ended up outperforming the US and Europe last quarter. But will this trend continue? Here to tell us is Jim O'Neill, formerly of Goldman Sachs, and the economist who coined the BRIC terminology. Jim, emerging markets have been met with quite differing views lately. Some markets are doing great and some aren't doing as well. What do you think will happen over the next few months, maybe like for the rest of the year?
Well, as you said yourself, quite a few of them have done pretty well. I find it more than amusing that there was this kind of crazy view around about some mass crisis in the emerging world in January, which turned out to be, surprise, surprise, nonsense. I dreamt up a group called the Next 11 many years ago, and I think when I last looked, 8 of those 11 have got more than double-digit gains year to date. Some of them probably will continue to do really well, and maybe some others as well. I think Africa's kind of pretty interesting. Some big emerging places are kind of pretty cheap. And if we don't have the worst of what everybody is worrying about from the Fed, and if some of these places continue down the path of trying to do some better things, they will probably continue to do pretty well.
Can you name some specific countries?
Well, I continue to be very positive about the Chinese consumer, so I don't think that means people should necessarily go in buying some Chinese index, but stocks that relate to Chinese consumer, whether they be Chinese or global ones, I think strike me as being still highly attractive. Russia is, of course, very interesting because it's so cheap, and if people have got a few shekels to spare and not worry about it when they go to bed, that might be worthy of some. But I think Indonesia and India are both very interesting. They've got elections in both places and some signs of improvement in policy if the favoured candidates get through. Large parts of Africa, Nigeria is a place I'm very focused on. I just made a big personal investment there recently. And so I could go, there's a lot of places.
Well, you mentioned Russia, and I think that's really interesting considering how much talk there is about Russia right now. And the My6 index is down 10% year to date. Do you think the Ukraine crisis will take out heat of the Russian economy for a long time? Or do you think you can use this weakness as a buy-in opportunity?
I wish I knew the answer. I mean, the truth of the matter is I had a call option on the My6 myself until a couple of months ago, and I got out because it just wasn't performing. And I'm lucky I got out before the worst of the mess that's happened. But, you know, it's so complex. You have to figure out, is Putin doing what he's up to because it's a distraction from the economy or not? And, you know, it seems to me his popularity inside Russia is on the rise because of what he's been doing. But what really would make the Russian stock market story do better is as and when the economy starts to do better.
So if not Russia, if you had one place to invest right now, where would you put your shekels?
My big views at the start of this year in terms of equities were, number one, it was going to be a much harder year because the US market, to me, doesn't look to be so clear. Secondly, therefore, global equity leadership, if we're going to get it, has to come from outside the US, probably Europe or China. And thirdly, against that background, Chinese consumer-related stocks or peripheral Europe were the places that I think had the best fundamentals, and I still think that's the case.
You just mentioned the US, and the US stock markets had quite a big rally over the last few weeks. We just had some record highs. Do you think this is a bubble, or do you think we continue to see the US market outperform?
I'm very indifferent about the US market these days. For much of the past 5 years, it's been easy to be bullish, which I was, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if we try to rally further, and I wouldn't be surprised if we go down. Something I learned to respect many years ago was what I call the 5-day rule as to what happens to the S&P in the first 5 days of the year. And if it goes down, which it did, there's a 50-50 chance it'll be a down year. So I'm kind of indifferent.
It could go anywhere from here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jim.
My pleasure.